Hi, I'm Jason Jaspersen. Welcome to my studio. It's a rare opportunity to work on a life-size sculpture. I've worked on projects larger. Those in the New Ulm area will know Herman the German. I did a sculpture larger than that when I was 30. But that kind of stuff it's not an often kind of project for me. So I'm excited to be working on life-size. Wanda Gog was a similar scale, but this is two standing figures, so the scope of the project is fairly large. That big sculpture was 32 feet head to toe. I worked with Artstone on that. It was a sculpture for a hospital in Carroll, Iowa, and it was a copy of a statue of St. Anthony Regional Surgical Center, Medical Center. So I was translating an existing sculpture into a giant wall relief. The concept for this project came out of necessity. There was a committee that was asking for a Lutheran military monument to be placed on campus at Bethany Lutheran College in Mankato. Well, that started 6 years ago. So I've been kind of in and out of involvement with this for 6 years. I did a kind of a rough concept and an estimate, a bid. Worked with the committee 6 years ago, and then 5 years ago I kind of renewed, did a little bit of more refined work with the committee. But meanwhile, I'm doing other things. I'm doing other projects. There was a long period of fundraising, and nobody knew for sure if this project was actually going to happen. Figures stand in an almost identical stance, and that refers to two Greek bronze statues that were pulled out of the Mediterranean in the 70s. Two warriors. And I'm taking that idea of sort of synchronized stance, and I'm using it in a few different ways. So they stand in an almost identical fashion, but they wear combat gear from vastly different eras. So this sculpture, this figure is from around 1500, and this figure is roughly contemporary. So they're separated by about 500 years, but by making them kind of synchronized, I'm implying that there's something the same. There's external differences, but there's something the same about them. Both of them read their Bible, and that's sort of the internal world that they share. Their faith is in common. They're separated by time. They're joined by their faith. So you've got sort of brothers that never meet. And they'll stand back to back, standing in almost identical fashion. They don't see each other, but they're so close to each other. The statue that I'm working on right now, we call him Warrior One internally. We call him Warrior One. He has a steel and aluminum armature, a frame on the inside, and then foam insulation is attached to that armature to kind of bulk it out in a lightweight way. Chicken wire is wrapped around that foam in order to give the clay something to adhere to. Sometimes spray foam is used to fill out, so you can kind of see up here in the flag area there's still some exposed sections that have mesh and spray foam. So this figure also has a foam core, but that foam core was arrived at a vastly different way. We had a model pose, a member of the ROTC, and he put on his gear, and we took reference photos of him. I've got some reference photos on the wall here for us to look at as we sculpt, and we also have those on our phone that we kind of look at for details. But at the same time we took those photos, we took a photogrammetry scan of the model. So we were collecting points of data in order to create a digital three-dimensional model of him. We were then able to take that model and output it as a 3D print, and that same file, that same digital file, we could use to have robotic arms carve a giant block of styrofoam into that same model. So inside of this clay, just behind a thin skin of clay, there's solid white beady styrofoam that comes from a scan of the actual model. In retrospect, it's really convenient to think about how this sculpture is using kind of old methods that might be recognizable to somebody of this era from the 1500s. We used a 3D pantograph that allowed us to take points from a scale model. And we could take a point from that scale model, and with the help of that mechanism, find that point in space at our large scale. Well, that's kind of Renaissance era technology, using geometry and engineering. And using geometry and engineering also, but in a very contemporary way. We're using 3D scanning and 3D prints and working with different kinds of machines to output this. And so our contemporary figure has kind of a contemporary process, and our traditional figure has kind of a traditional process. I used technology for collaboration in a few different ways. On this 1500s figure, we used a 3D pantograph, and that, because that, it's basically like a giant key maker. When you get a key copied, it moves in tandem. That allowed us to put sort of depth markers. We put bamboo skewers in the foam, and they were at accurate depths. Well, if you put enough of those in, this whole thing becomes like a three-dimensional dot-to-dot. And that allowed relatively untrained helpers to volunteer. So different students from my classes at Bethany, or from just people walking by, could, I could kind of ask them if they want to help. And, the initial response is, well, I don't know how. But I showed them, all you have to do is just take some clay and kind of put it on until you've made a pile that reaches the top of that skewer. And then we kind of fill in between these little mountains. So that's a system that the existence of that tool, that 3D pantograph, changes who can participate. It sort of democratizes the sculpting a bit. So, I still have the overall vision. I'm still guiding and directing, but that provided an access point for a lot of people who usually wouldn't be able to work on something like this. It provides a way for them to participate. I think that's I thought that was a pretty special opportunity. A similar thing is true with the 3D printed version, the scanning technology. You know, it gave us this foam core that then all we had to do is kind of create little pancakes of clay like this. You just sort of flatten it out and then apply it. And so we just kind of wrapped this whole thing, and that's an easy enough task for somebody to volunteer to do. And you know, naturally there's a whole lot of refining that has to be done after that, but that blocking in, that massing in stage, these two pieces of technology, the Renaissance era technology and the contemporary technology, both gave us opportunities for collaboration, for involvement. Project management has been kind of an emerging role for me in the past few years, and being a college professor has really sort of given me a new opportunity to involve people. I've got, you know, there's sort of a crowd of people built into my day. So I've been looking at ways to take my professional projects and turn them into opportunities for students. But that becomes a new scope of management. I need to manage a project in a new way so that I can track what projects need to be done, who's going to do them, are there dependencies or timelines associated with them? Does one thing have to be done before another? Do we have to order supplies? So, you know, my role, where I used to be, you know, sort of the lone wolf and I would just take care of everything, it's bigger. I mean, I could do this myself, but if I can get better at project management, I figure, put some time into that, then not only can the job be done more efficiently, faster, but also it provides opportunities for students to participate. And I think, as an art educator, teaching people how to do this, that's a unique opportunity. Art education has taken a turn in the last 100 years or so, 120 years maybe. It's gradually really favored the individual. It's really been about developing a personal vision, a personal voice. And it wasn't always that way. And I'm kind of fascinated by paradigms. What do foundational assumptions do? What are the results of the way that you think about the world and how it operates? So there was a time when it would take generations to build a cathedral, hundreds of years. And I just wonder, you know, how is that possible, that the people who start a thing are not the people who finish the thing, and maybe that's not so astounding, but the result is astounding in, say, a Gothic cathedral. It might take hundreds of years to build, and somehow the culture of the moment, of the era, allowed for that. So I'm thinking about art education in this sort of long scope idea, where I'm trying kind of an apprentice model in art education. I want to train students to think about service, to think that They might be able to use their gifts for something bigger than their name or their portfolio. Collaboration, becomes easier to think about when individual credit is less of a factor. So it's not so much about my voice, it's more about what can we do together. So I take a particular stance on originality. Originality is it's one of the hallmarks that we think of when we think of artists. We think of creativity as these are the people that are original, that are creative, or they're making something new. I think originality is a myth. What actually happens is recombinations. Things that we think of as original are really just new mixes of existing things. Because this project has been going on for so long, 6 years or so, I've had plenty of opportunities to look at it fresh, to see it again. I'll set it down, put it away for a while, and months or even, in some cases, a year or more will go by between treatments, between sketches or models. So it's a very iterative process. There have been a lot of drafts of it. I think I've said on this show several times that I don't know what I'm doing, and that was especially true at the beginning of this project. I was tasked with figuring out how do you represent a Lutheran military monument? And at first I was a little lost about how to solve that riddle, sort of. So my early sketches, I think, look a little lost. I don't really have a clear direction at that point. But then, little by little, just I'll say by working the problem, by trying again and trying again, I came to what I consider an elegant solution. These two figures standing back to back, they sort of speak of time travel, or of a connection, an invisible connection. The real appeal of this monument is in something that you can't see. They're tethered to each other. Working with others, is always, it's kind of a double-edged sword. You get the benefit of more minds, more hands. I'm working with others on planning committees. I'm working with others in the physical production of the work. There's fundraising that's happening, so it's a big team. And one of the challenges is, sort of maintaining the integrity of the vision, trying to keep the main thing, try to communicate what is this about to and through the participants. And sometimes, that takes work to refocus if necessary, remind people what it's about. Every now and then there's a suggestion that make some sort of a change. I wonder how this project will work in terms of contemporary thought, contemporary dialogue. There's some potential contentious issues embedded in the design. But I and planning committee members believe strongly enough in this concept that we've stayed the course throughout all the different kind of publicity and just all the different stages. It takes work sometimes it takes work to stay standing in the same place. And these, this concept is relatively intact from what I thought it should be all those years ago. Really, the main point is still the main point. And things that are changing are just a tiny little nuanced embellishments, but overall the broad strokes remain the same.
So can you talk about some of the specific physical characteristics that have remained core to the concept?
So the core components of this piece are, first of all, there's two figures. That's kind of an expensive choice, and actually I had proposed somewhere along the line when it felt like we weren't moving forward, and I wasn't sure if the project was going to go, I had proposed that maybe we cut out the contemporary figure and make it just the 1500s figure. But the fact that there's two figures is really one of the main points. That invisible connection across time is something that I think is non-negotiable on this piece. The eras that they represent, the thing that they do. So both of those features, the eras that they represent and the thing that they do, are central to the message. They both read their Bible. They both they represent vastly different eras, separated by 500 years. And they're both in representative combat gear that we're working hard, we're researching to try to make sure that at the very least it doesn't look wrong, but we hope that it's, some would say, in-world. As we're designing, we want it to be appropriate for its era. So there are some very stable aspects to this project. It's pretty satisfying to see this come to fruition. This project in particular has been going on for years, and it's, I lived with it in my imagination for a long time. Other people didn't really always understand what I was talking about. So it's nice to, it takes a long time to do the work, but it's nice to be able to sort of demonstrate in real scale what I've been imagining. It's also, every project is sort of like, you hope it works. You think this has got a good chance of working, and so far it seems to be working at full scale. I think the symbolism works. for a sculptor, to work on a life-size bronze statue, that's, for me, I think of that as a, kind of a goal, something that I like to work towards doing. So, just the idea of doing life-size figures, regardless of what they represent, that's a nice outcome for me too. I like working life-size.
So, obviously this project has taken, 5+ years of your time. Is that common for this kind of project, or is it something that is taking longer than others?
For me or for others?
Just in general.
In general?
You. We'll go with you. Just
for
personal
me.
experience, yeah.
Most of my projects don't take this long, but most of my projects aren't a pair of life-size figures. So I've heard it said that to be an artist requires sustained imagination. And so I've been sustaining this for 5+ years. I think for a sculptor in particular, because the materials and the processes are so involved and sometimes so expensive, and it's a public piece, it takes longer. You have to sustain that imagination and kind of keep the concept from dying for a longer time. So yeah, most of my jobs don't last this long, but I've had multi-year projects before. So I have a lot of ideas. I spend my morning. I split my time in my mornings. I work on concepts first thing, if I can, when my brain is fresh and before it gets overrun with tasks and emails. And there's just a lot of ideas that I have, or there's unrealized proposals that I've put together, things that I've sketched or modeled that haven't seen the light of day. So it's satisfying to see this one, get all the way through and become real. But boy, I've got stuff that involves light and shadows in my mind. I have projects that are sculptural periscopes, multi-plane cameras. There's just there's a backlog of concepts, and I just don't have enough time. It's like my life is too short to get to all that stuff, all the things I want to do. But when you get one done, that feels good. It feels good to get one done.